Hey there berries, welcome to another season 13 support guide, this time featuring Lux. If you're new to how I cover support guides, then we'll be going in depth through everything. We're going to be starting off with runes, going into summoners, into a practice tool to talk about items and abilities and skill orders and any kind of tips and tricks to help you win your games in solo queue. If you don't know who I am, I'm Bizzleberry. I do YouTube videos primarily for support here on this channel, and I also stream at twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, and you're more than welcome to go ask there for YouTube or YouTube comments for help or tips on how to play support. I usually do these videos in one take. I usually do it pretty well, apart from my most recent Thresh guide where I started choking midway. And as I said, that can feel my throat going, but hopefully it'll be a clean one take cut of everything that you need to know how to play Lux. So as you can see already on the runes, if you've been looking at them already, we're going to be doing an arcane comet kind of build. It's the most popular build for sure on Lux, and also the most efficient. There are kind of other gimmicky things that you can kind of maybe do with Airy or Guardian, but I don't recommend those. The runes that you see on your screen right now, I highly recommend. Arcane Comet works great with Lux's E, which we'll talk about later on, and just generic stuff like Mana Flow Ban to increase your mana, Transcendence to reduce your cooldown reduction, and on pairing with that in the Ultimate Hunter and Domination, you have the extra cooldown reduction there to reduce your cooldown of your ultimate even further when it's already quite a low cooldown, so you get to spam it a little bit more in your games. Scorch works really nicely during laning phase. I know some people like going Gathering Storm, but Lux is a champion, as a support champion that you need to be able to win lane in, and Gathering Storm doesn't kick in until 10 minutes, and you need to be trying to build up an advantage before then, and Scorch helps give you a tiny amount of damage in order to try and secure some more kills in the bot lane. Cheap Shot works really well with both of Lux's damage abilities, so it gives you extra true damage as well, so once again a little bit more damage in the early stages of the laning phase in order to help you get those kills that you need in bot lane. There aren't really other trees I want to go into. Sometimes when I do these guides we talk about one or two, but I want you just to focus on this sorcery plus domination matchup. Next we're going to be going into the practice tool. I'm going to be taking Lux, and we're going to briefly talk about summoners. Lux is a little bit more flexible in terms of some champions, and AP champions in particular, in terms of what runes and in terms of summoners that you're going to be picking. Ignite, Flash is going to be the standard one that most people take. You can definitely opt into something like an Exhaust, particularly if you are in like Bronze and Silver, where Master Yi might be a bit more of a dominant figure in the jungle. And if that is the case, then taking Exhaust for something extreme as that is fine. But generally I would want you to keep the Ignite. Once again, as mentioned in the rune section, you want to be looking in getting kills in that laning phase, because if you can't keep up or even ahead of the curve in terms of gold, your damage power will feel much worse. Right, so next we are going to be talking about the items that you can take on Lux. So you're going to be starting with Spell Thieves. There's literally nothing else that you can take with those two health potions. And then you have two actual boots options. When I'm playing support, I usually want to take boots first. Increased movement speed is key in staying alive and making plays in the bot lane. You do have two options. You have the Boots of Lucidity and the Sorcerer's Shoes. Now the Sorcerer's Shoes is a really great option because although it costs more, it gives you magic penetration, which you're going to find quite difficult to amount to a high amount in your build anyway. But Sorc Shoes having plus 18 magic penetration that early on is an immense stat to have, because not many people are going to be picking up magic resistance early. And also the way it works is that when an opponent has less magic resistance, magic penetration becomes more valuable. If the enemy starts stacking up magic resistance items, something like the Sorc Shoes won't be quite as valuable, and you'll be leaning into percent penetration, which we'll talk about slightly later on, which will be primarily found on the Void Staff. But generally, I want you to focus on picking up the Sorcerer's Shoes. The Boots of Lucidity are a good option if you are thinking of a more like crowd control kind of Lux with the shields. But because the shield value right now isn't particularly amazing, I would want you to focus completely on the Sorc Shoes. Next, we have a few other suggested items, but honestly, the one that clearly stands out is the Ludens. Once again, you're going to get more magic penetration with that, with the Mythic passive. Works also really nicely the Echo passive, where if you land an ability, it does that little extra bit of splash. That works really nicely in combination with the amount of burst that Lux has. Leandries is an anti-tank item, but it doesn't really work very well with Lux with anti-tank, because although her cooldowns aren't too long, the amount of Leandry's damage that she'll be pumping out won't be that high, honestly. And Crown is good against assassins, but it's generally more of a mid lane item. If you were particularly getting like really worried about like hard engaged bot lane plus an assassin mid, maybe an assassin jungle as well, you could maybe slide into the Crown or Shattered Queen role. It is a cheaper item at 400 gold, cheaper than the other two options, so it will allow you to get another item that's slightly quicker, but the damage fall off is quite big, so do factor that in. So ideally you're always going in for that Luden's Tempest. Now generally at this point you're going to be starting to starve on gold. You do have a couple of options. So if you are any team which has a lot of magic damage anyway, and you can see that the enemy team is taking magic resistance, then I'm going to want you to pick up a Void Staff. It's going to give you 40% magic penetration against that, and it will make you do more damage against those pesky tanks. If they are not picking up magic resistance, then actually Shadow Flame becomes really strong, especially if the enemy team has shields. Once again, it's going to give you even more magic penetration, pushing in towards doing true damage to enemies because that don't have magic resistance, just because you'll be getting closer to that 0 number, which means that your abilities will do an insane amount of damage. So Shadow Flame is a great option against enemies that are not picking up magic resistance. Once again, if you're kind of worried about assassins, you kind of opt into a Zhonya's. Do not do Crown plus Zhonya's, that's way overkill, and you won't be doing anything all game. But you could go into a second item for Zhonya's, that is perfectly valid. But generally, you're going to be in the mindset of only being able to take one of these items. So Horizon Focus isn't really worth it. So you're going to be choosing either the Zhonya's, the Shadow Flame, or the Void Staff. So lots of magic resistance on the enemy team, Void Staff. No magic resistance, Shadow Flame. If you're worried about assassins, then the Zhonya's, Stasis. But ideally, something like the Shadow Flame would be good. And this is probably where you're going to start struggling with cash quite a bit at this point. And then you're going to want to be opting into the Wardstone, which I pretty much recommend that you take on pretty much any support. Once you hit level 13, this Watchful Wardstone gets converted into a Vigilant Wardstone, which also counts as a legendary item. So technically you'll be getting 5 more magic penetration because of the Ludens. Grants all other legendary items 5 magic penetration. So once again, quick way to get 5 magic pen. And then also you're getting haste, ability power, and bonus health. Also, you'll be able to put an additional stealth ward and a control ward on the map, toasting up your wards for up to 6 on the map at one point. And super cheap. There's no reason why you shouldn't be having this item. Also, all of your control wards will go into this item too, so you don't have to worry about bag space. So that is your general build. I mean, like getting to a death cap, like final item would obviously be ideal, but highly impractical. So just try and pick up any kind of little bits of AP here and there. Maybe a random stopwatch could help if you don't already have a Zhonya's, just to potentially like help out some plays there. But unless you're getting like really fed, you're not going to be able to go full build playing as a support, especially going down into the AP line. So that is the item build with Lux. Next we are going to be talking about her abilities. So let me just spawn in an ally dummy and a couple of enemy dummies. Okay, so let's talk about Lux's passive first. Illumination. Lux's damaging abilities mark enemies for 6 seconds. Lux's attacks consume the mark, dealing basically bonus magic damage. Final Spark, which is our ultimate, will consume marks on the enemy and then refresh them. So your Q, your E, and your ultimate are all damaging abilities. I'm actually going to need some level ups here to showcase this. And it will leave a little glow. So we're going to do our Q now. I'm going to explain what the Q does, and then we're going to go back to the passive. So Q is Lux's root, it fires out on a line and it roots a target for 2 seconds. Fairly standard. But the thing is that this can pass through a unit and still bind one more unit. So this can hit 2 targets, up to 2 targets. So in this situation here where we've got 2 target dummies, we actually end up rooting both targets and then both of them get the illumination debuff. And with this skin it's a slight like purple. On the vanilla skin, the base skin, it will be like a white glow. Now we want to detonate those marks with the passive. So for example, if we use an auto attack, it's going to detonate each one of those marks. So to get the optimal amount of overall damage on a target, you're doing an ability, auto attack, ability, auto attack. So it's kind of impractical to necessarily do that, but landing auto attacks every now and then during laning phase in particular, when you have landed an ability, is something that you're definitely going to want to look at doing to increasing your damage output in lane. So once again, Lux's Q is a up to double root. So for example, if this target at the front here was a melee minion, and the enemy champion was standing behind that melee minion, you could in theory opt to looking into getting a cheeky surprise binding like that, because they maybe thought that they were protected by that one minion in front of them. Next ability is Lux's Shield. Similar kind of projectile, slightly thicker. It goes out, but also returns, and it also does another shield on the way back. And Lux will also always receive the full amount of the shield. So you can see I get a tiny shield, when it comes back, shield is now bigger. It is a skill shot, so your allies will be able to move out of this. So this affects yourself and it also affects allied champions. So you can see this target dummy is also getting the full effect. This has no limit, unlike the Q, where the Q can only hit 2 targets. This can hit as many allied champions as you are able to land on. There can be an instance where, for example, you throw it out and only one instance of the shield lands on the target dummy because they didn't get the return. So you need to be careful sometimes when positioning the shield to try and allow your allies to get multiple instances of the shield. Might as well talk about a little shield tip. So if you're throwing at the shield and you're in a bit of trouble, say you got an ignite tick about to tick and kill you, you can actually flash forward into the shield to try and claim the shield back to you just a tiny bit quicker. The circumstances of having to do that are extremely rare, but I thought I'll throw that out there. Pun intended. Right, E next. Lux's third ability. Quite cool ability, does a lot of things in one go. So when you initially first throw it out, it stays on the ground. Now this also gives vision, so you can face check brushes with this. Also, as it's on the ground, it's going to slow everyone inside, and then you can either let it detonate via it timing out, or you can press the button again to detonate it early. And this can hit an infinite amount of targets. And once again, when it hits an enemy target, it will then put that illumination debuff, and then you're going to want to look to auto hitting. Now, I'm going to tell you the biggest Lux crimes that are committed in every single ELO, even in Diamond. Actually, I had a case, funnily, yesterday, where a master Lux support player was doing this incorrectly. So the basic combo that every Lux player should be doing is E, then Q. The biggest mistake that you will see is Lux players doing the opposite, doing their Q, then their E. So doing Q, and then E is a big no-no-no. Now the main reason behind that is because the E slows. So if you land your E and don't actually detonate it, this whole area is slowed, which means it's going to be easier for you to land your Q. Also, you can kind of predict where the enemy's going to move to. So generally, if they're going to have a big circle like that, they're going to go look for the quickest point of exit in order to escape your ability. And you can use that as a herding mechanic. So for example, here with this training dummy, if I put the circle below them, they're going to want to run north in order to move out. So you're going to want to then Q at the edge of that circle, because that's the most likely place where the enemy's going to move. So they're going to be slowed, they're going to want to run out. You then quickly Q them, and now they're controlled, and then you can detonate your E in order to get a nice 2-hit combo of... So let me show you that again. So it's E on the ground, so they're slowed, landing your binding, auto attack, detonate the E, auto attack. And that's how you can get 2 auto attacks off and land your Q and your E effectively in lane. And you'll be surprised how many Lux players don't do that basic combo of E into Q. Now finally, we're going to be talking about Lux's ultimate, which goes off quite the range. You can see on the minimap how far that actually goes. And it's one of the lowest ulti cooldowns in the game. And because we're going to be picking up Ultimate Hunter and Transcendence, we're going to try and push that even lower. The Watchful Wardstone, the haste, once that transforms into Vigilant Wardstone, gives you a lot of haste as well. We've got haste on our Ludens as well. So we've got a lot of haste affecting our ultimate. So once you get to like level 16, you can get this to around about a 23-22 second cooldown, which is absurd. So Lux's ultimate is another line attack, but the range is insanely high. And it does a considerable amount of damage. Now the main thing is to go back to our passive, and it says Final Spark will consume marks on the target and refresh them. So if you're able to land either an E or an Q on them, so the most basic combo would be landing your binding and then ulting straight away as they're rooted, because they won't be able to escape your ulti. It will detonate those passive stacks that you've got from landing your binding, detonate them, and then reapply them. So if you're able to then auto attack after that, then that's fantastic. But the most basic use of this ultimate is Q into R. You can then layer it as well, as we were talking about with the previous combo. So for example, if we do E below them, forcing them to wanting to walk up. So we do E below them, binding, ulti, auto attack, E, auto attack. You got 3 auto attacks off there, landing all of your abilities and using your E to set up your binding to get that full combination off. Now that's the ideal way of doing that. Obviously in some games you're not going to be able to get up close. As the game goes on longer, you're going to be more fragile in order to be able to do that. So generally it's going to be quite difficult to do that unless it's like an assassin or someone like that jumping onto your AD carry's face. Then you might be able to get something like at least 2 of those auto attacks off. But you are wanting to get as many of these passive stacks off as it is in extra good chunk of DPS, especially while you're waiting for maybe like your E or your Q to come off cooldown. The W used to be more powerful in terms of playing like an Enchanter Lux, but with the Seraphine and Lux kind of bot lanes, they nerfed the amount of shields. Also, there's like a lot of shield removal and reduction items in the game now, so shields overall don't have as a big a value as they maybe have done in previous seasons. So Enchanter Lux isn't great, and generally that's why we're only really talking about the AP kind of build. In terms of actual skill ordering, you're going to want to max your E first, because that is the ability that you're always going to be throwing out first, and is also the highest base damage out of the E and the Q. So it's going to be your main harassing tool. It's going to help you land that Arcane Comet because they're slowed, and also the targets get slowed for a tiny bit after that gets detonated as well. So it's like 1 second extra slow to make sure that Arcane Comet flies onto the head and increases your damage again. Next, we are going to want to actually max the W. Even though the shield value isn't super amazing, the reason why we're maxing it second is because the per point value in Q is terrible. Literally the only thing you get for putting points in your Q is plus 40 base damage, which is quite disgustingly bad. I think it used to reduce cooldown of it, but Riot didn't bother. They didn't like it. So it's E into W into Q. So maxing E, which also, by the way, increases the amount that the target gets slowed from 25% to 45%. And then we're maxing the shield, which will reduce the cooldown of the shield and increase the shield value. Even though the shield value isn't great, so when you're looking at it, it's like a 175 shield. Don't forget, you can get a double value on that still, so that doesn't count. You need to times that by 2, and then also you need to also consider the fact that you are able to shield lots of people on your team at once. So yes, there are shield removal, yes, there is shield reduction, but if you actually have this ability maxed out with a little bit of AP and you hit multiple targets twice in a team fight, you're effectively potentially blocking around about 1000 to 1500 damage in a very big late game team fight, which is pretty invaluable and would be roughly, you know, could easily be a game changer, could definitely help blocking and stuff like Karthus ultimate and things like that as well, where you can get your whole team to kind of quickly stack up. You throw the shield and able to block a fair chunk amount of that damage. And then finally maxing the Q, and obviously leveling up your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11 and 16. So as I said before, general laning phase, you're looking to poke, utilizing the brushes if you can to chuck them out. If you don't have priority of brushes and you want to phase check brushes, always check out your E first. The exception of not doing E first, there is an exception, because there is, if we let's actually teleport back and get, oh, we got WODs. So here, for example, say if the enemy doesn't have any vision of your location. Imagine they're walking from the river into the brush. If you do your E here, the enemy's going to instantly react, and it can be more difficult to potentially land a binding if they're jumpy, because they know they're getting jumped from a brush. It could lead to an instant dash or an instant flash, or getting ready for that binding to land. It is potentially easy to mess it up as well with the height elevation, which I'm not going to get too into, where abilities don't necessarily land exactly where you think they are when you're up on higher ground to the river. Yes, this green area is higher up elevation than to the river. So landing a very quick urgent binding. Also, enemies can suddenly change path and direction as well. So in the heat of a moment, doing a quick Q like this to an enemy, maybe looking to about to attack your ward. So you do quick binding, ulti, and then chuck your E over. Try and get whatever auto attack weave that you can, landing an ignite if you have to. That situation is fine. Obviously, once again, the ideal situation is that you're doing a quick E into Q, ultimate, auto attack, E detonate, auto attack. That is once again the ideal combo if you're having your E down on the ground first. But there are some situations where even the split second of doing your E could be a bit disruptive. There's also some very outlined situations in lane where you can do Q first, but I don't want to encourage you to do Q first, because you can get into some really bad habits. But from a brush angle, and you know that the exact second when someone is about to like last hit a cannon minion, and you have a nice kind of flank angle from the brush, doing a Q in that situation could pose to be potentially useful. But you want to try your best to avoid using Q first as much as possible. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this video is E first, okay? E first, you can do it. The main reason why I hop on about it is because every time I've done a Lux coaching session with people, I don't do coaching anymore, but when I used to help Lux players, they would always do Q first. And it is a very hard job to drill and get people out of that habit of doing Q first. So E first, okay? E first. Other than that, if that is literally the only thing you take away from the video is E first, then your win rate will already go up. I promise it will. The item build is a fairly standard kind of AP build path. The combos are tricky in terms of doing it initially, but if you can get the habit of weaving that auto attack with your abilities, so, and also using your E as a herding tool, that's another really big tip. So if you can see here, once again, making it so that they're thinking that the shortest point of exit is north, and then you can bind roughly in that area to increase the chance that they get hit by the binding. Those are the kind of the best tools that you have in helping land your Q. All the best. I hope this Lux support guide helps you out. I do have other support guides, as I mentioned at the start of the video, on the channel, so feel free to check those out if you want to learn any other supports for Season 13, or if you want to have any gameplay, or if you want to come and say hi at twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, you're more than welcome. Good luck with playing Lux in your support games, and I'll see you for another video soon.